Maria, allow me to introduce you as the systemic approach. And together we are building something I think very ambitious, but extremely important for, I would say, the systemic approach. I'll let you please approach the stage little by little. I had the pleasure to discover Maria a few years ago in Wharton, in Philadelphia, I think like most of you in this room. And after a few years, we had the honor to be contacted by Maria to build something which I think is the most important pillar for building a systemic approach. Without data, we go nowhere. As long as you don't use a data set which is understandable, comparable, and important for investors, you will remain in the dark side of the moon. No one will see you, no one will understand your needs, no one will invest in your country. So our responsibility is to build an overarching system that can really help all of your countries to express their data need and to give input that can provide an intervention from private capital markets, from international organizations, and trying to understand what you need and put this in a systemic approach. This ambition as a name is called OFINET. And Maria, together with a very important group of people, have been working over the last, I would say, 12 months, even 18 months if you want. Everything started in Venice, in trying to build a simple questionnaire, a survey that can help all of your countries to give a data set. If we all work in the same language, in the same category, with the same definition, and we have a common understanding, we can tell to the world our needs. If we don't do this, we are nowhere. We will continue to make thousands of useless pilots which are incomprehensible to international investors. And this is not the case. We need to scale up. Scale up, it means that we need to make a systemic approach. And Maria, with the scientific committee of OFINET, they have produced this survey, has been checked and I would say pre-sounded with our advisory council, where we have a very important institution like the World Bank, OECD, the Arabic Monetary Fund, that have given their views. So now we are ready to go. Maria, just to let you know what I said yesterday to my ISMMA guys, that we need to build now a technical committee where we need a national expert per country who is taking responsibility of completing this data set and send this to us for a quality check, and then we will make a publication of all the data set country by country. We are very ambitious. We want to cover 100 countries and go back to all the regulators of the world, your national central bank, your Minister of Finance, the European Commission, the OECD, and tell them what is the situation in your country. Because like this, we can build a systemic approach for policy, for regulation, and we can take action. Maria, that was, I think, what we have done. So yesterday I convinced my people. They say to me, I said, you have 3 months to think who is the lucky guy or the lucky lady who will provide us data. So our ISMMA people is fully committed to be the technical body that will try to feed this kind. I told them that we want to have everything ready by November next year. So for the next conference that we don't know yet where will be, we want to show you, and you have to help us, our new data set on housing. And I want to bring this to a new gentleman, a Danish gentleman in Brussels, who is for the first time a housing commissioner. So housing is really becoming the most important political center in Brussels. And I think it is becoming also in your countries. So we need to be ready to give numbers to these people. Thank you, Maria. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. All right. I better not touch it, I realize that. Distinguished guests and friends, because I know so many of you, I'm delighted to be here and speak for you all. I'm aware that my generation should really not be keynote speakers. I realize that. We should hand over to the next generation, and they should take this all forward. But, as you all know, when CAHF calls you and she needs you, then you do not say no. So here I am. And also, because this is a very special occasion, it is the 40th anniversary of AUHF, so it is also timely to look back a bit, at least. And looking back, of course, I can. So that is what I will start with this morning. For me personally, it is also an important milestone. Some of you were there in the training program in March in Mombasa, so you know what we celebrated there on the quick, basically. But it is precisely 50 years ago that I got my first local job in Africa. It was in Kenya, and it is nearly precisely on the day that I got my first job. 50% Ministry of Housing, 50% in a unit in the university that was called the Housing Finance and Research Unit. And I'm going to speak about that experience because that has given me the foundation, first of all, for my very long career in housing and housing finance, but also because there are interesting lessons from that period to be learned. So those were very formative years, and I'm forever grateful that I was able to work within the local institutional structure of Kenya. I wasn't supported by the World Bank, I just was a local person, and that made a big difference. So I had the luck of, indeed, that experience. In that time, and some of you may remember, but it was the age of appropriate technology. Anyone knowing that term still? Appropriate technology? Or am I really the only one in the room that experienced that period? You know, okay. What was appropriate technology? It's so close to what we call green, efficient, whatever today. Appropriate technology was the focus for affordable housing. So the architects in that unit, this unit at the University of Nairobi, was made up of engineers, architects, and the odd social scientists, as I was called. The architects and engineers developed all these wonderful, affordable, appropriate housing techniques, basically. And I'm going to show you if it works. No. How do I move it forward? No, we do not get, yeah. All right, so the engineers built housing with all these, and after great study, with shallow foundations, wall materials that were timber, that were soil cement blocks in order to avoid full cement housing. The ventilation was looked at because most of the building standards in the country were still using very old colonial ventilation standards of so many changes of air per whatever. So the housing situation on the lot for climatological efficiency was a big part of it. The location, so that you would not build affordable housing far away from the city. All of that was in that package. And we developed also affordable affordability mechanisms. All the houses that we designed had an extra room in the back so that the owner who bought the plot would have a tenant in the back that would help the payment of the loan. Now you all think this is normal, but that was then rather revolutionary. So we built these things for incremental building. So that, I no, my clicker. You can move it forward, maybe in the back. This was another example of the techniques we used. Yes, go on. Next one. All these principles were put together in a scheme that now you will really laugh at. And that was the Kibera low-income housing scheme. Kibera, at that time that I worked in the unit, in 74, 75, until 78, was empty public land. It was only occupied by a Nubian village. And for that land, well located, close to the industrial area and so on, we made a plan, this unit of mine that I worked in with wonderful colleagues. And it was based on all these principles that I showed you. So what came of all of these efforts? And I have to disappoint you. You now know how Kibera looks like. None of this was actually implemented. And why not? These were all sound principles. And they are principles that you now think are very common. But we were ahead of our time, I suppose. So the major constraint was that the regulatory authorities, which were the medical officer of health, he controlled the building standards, medical officer of health, because we based all this housing design on the miasma theory of transmission of disease. That was then still common in the 70s. So he forbade this type of project. The National Housing Corporation had the standard of 2-bedroomed houses with sanitation, full sanitation, and that was the minimum. And you couldn't build below that. Why? Not because the National Housing Corporation was bad and so on. It was just this notion after independence that Kenyans deserved a 2-bedroomed house. And yeah, if it was not affordable now, and you would create some informal housing, that would be a temporary thing. And ultimately, when we built 2-bedroomed houses for everyone, this informal housing would go away. Now, you all know what happened to that theory. So the other problem was that there were no, this was the 70s, high inflation globally. There was no commercial banks making loans to these owners of this type of housing. So what was commonly done was to set up a government housing bank. Tanzania had one, Kenya had one, Uganda had one. Just about every Tom, Dick, and Harry on the block had a fund or a government housing bank. And that was necessary in order to continue some form of lending and therefore building. But these institutions typically were not performing very well. They made fixed rate loans for 20 years in an inflationary environment. So you would think that people would never default on those loans. But because it was the government lending, they did. And they paid, this loan was paid the last. So one of these institutions after the other went basically insolvent. The Tanzanian bank was closed ultimately with a terrible balance sheet. The Kenyan one was reformed and is now doing very well. And so on across the continent. So that taught us also a lesson that these institutions may be necessary, but you have to structure them in a certain way to be sustainable. So what I now want to talk about is moving forward 50 years. This is 50 years ago. And it is worthwhile to think about what we did, but now we want to move ahead. So there is now widespread understanding that we need green, we need scale. Look at the data for household growth, for work age growth of the population. Look at that dark blue line. Those in the back, you can barely see it, but there is a line that goes to the ceiling. That's the line of growth in Africa. So we all now understand much better the urgency of the situation, and that by building for middle income standards, we are really not able ever to reach and have trickle-down housing for the people at the bottom. It just doesn't work, and I think everyone in this room, I call it, I'm preaching to the choir. You all know that now. There's nothing new about that. So widespread agreement on the need for green efficiency standards, local green standard, international standards, they are all now in development or already developed. Many countries now have local green standards that are attuned to the international standards so that international investors can actually come in using these standards and know that they are green, and when they are grilled by their shareholders or their government, that these standards are actually solid. So that has been a massive change in the market. And there is enormous awareness that residential buildings should not only be green just because we need green buildings, but that the emissions that the residential sector, if it is not well designed, contributes to overall emissions in the world is enormous. And if you have household growth going like this and growth in your market like this, that is detrimental for the environment. So many examples now. Oh, what I also wanted to mention, the measurement methods. We have the best and most innovative measurement methods for residential and buildings in general, for emissions and energy efficiency and so on. So this whole area has moved on tremendously and with enormous speed. The other area that's very important on the green appropriate technology area is the certification processes. So we have international certification, LEED, we have many, EDGE, and so on. We have compliance certificates put in place for green finance, and here the Covered Bond Council of the EMF is playing a big, and EMF itself is playing a big role. What do you call a green mortgage? Of course, there is no green mortgage. A green mortgage is based on a loan to a green house. If the house is not green, we have no green mortgage. So we must understand what we are talking about. So we need these standards first, and we have those in place in many more countries. So there are global disclosure and accounting standards for green. That whole area has developed with the speed of light. Now, I wish I could move this forward. This is just one slide to show why we now see this change and why in '74 we couldn't get any traction for it. We now see that the frequency and volatility of disasters has increased. The heat, feel at this room, the heat, particularly worrisome for the health of people in poor housing, is escalating. We have no choice anymore than to accept that climate change is here, and we have to do something about it. Also, I want now to go to the picture of investors. So when we look at the green investment, look at the green bar, it has really escalated. We have a lot of funds, investor funds, that are specialized in green development. But green development alone is not enough. And most investors are, including the DFIs, the development finance institutions, do not only want green, they want sustainable. And what is sustainable? Sustainable is a combination of green plus affordable in the housing sector. So social, we call it social. We have green and social funds. But in the housing sector, what that social means is mostly, and most of the funds are, for affordable housing. So green, affordable is sustainable in the investor language. So what is so difficult about it? We know green, very obviously, but how do we define affordable? What is affordable? And why is it so darn difficult to measure affordable? And why are investors reluctant to enter affordable? And that is the question that we have to solve. So affordable means the ability to pay for housing in relation to people's income, to the household income. The ratio, in other words, of housing-related cost, mortgage payments, rental payments, to a household's disposable income. It includes, of course, the loan that you get, the interest rate to the loan terms, the LTVs, the DTIs, the debt-to-income ratios. All of that defines affordable, okay? So, but these terms differ by income group. And access to housing finance in the affordable world is absolutely catalytic to create affordable housing. Finance is the core part of affordability. And improving, therefore, access to reasonably priced housing is the most important way to expand affordability. We need to begin to expand access to finance. Without that, building affordable housing that attracts investors is basically impossible. So this needs to be the most important, urgent topic beyond green. So green is important, and we will hear a lot about green. All your innovations, I'm very interested in listening to what has been done. But affordability is the other component for sustainability. So that is where we are today. Why is it so difficult? Affordable housing markets are extremely complex. They are segmented in different layers. It's very, very difficult to get your hands around what a housing market really is and where the affordable segment fits. There is low affordability levels. Incomes are very low relative to the price of housing. So this is not easy. Lack of fiscal resources to then come in with subsidies. Most countries are so indebted that subsidies to households are really, you cannot even begin to talk about it. So this is a constraint. Low penetration at the same time of your housing finance systems. Your housing finance systems are still focused on that lower middle income or higher middle income. The banking sector still struggling to here and there some projects, but not a general down market housing finance market. So I hope to listen to a lot of innovations here because you are the lenders, you are the ones that have to do it. The other and the last, a major problem is what Luca mentioned, the lack of data. If I'm an investor in affordable housing, affordable green housing, I can now get data on what green is. I can measure it. We all agree. Can I measure affordability? Do I know the income distribution of a country? Do I know all the terms of the different financial instruments? No. We have no information on what makes up affordable. And if I am going to do a blended fund for affordable in any of your countries, let's say Nigeria, it just got a blended fund going. Investors need to know whether that is really affordable, because they have shareholders. They need to know that this is really affordable. So what is affordable in Nigeria, this massive country, without data? We don't know. That will deter investors enormously. So we need to work on all of these different pieces, and it's very, very important. So I'm ending with, let's look back again. Let's tie the beginning of the talk to where we are now. What we learned from the past is that regulatory facilitation is very, very important, that your regulators understand the importance of green, affordable, sustainable housing. And they can do so much without subsidies to make that affordable product a formal product and not an illegal, informal product. Because for housing finance, we need formal. We can't have a lien on an informal plot. So, if regulators understand to adjust building standards, to allow the finance sector to come down market without enormous penalties to these lenders on the reserve requirements that they have to hold against affordable housing loans, I must say. So in that whole regulatory environment, both on the real side and on the finance side, enormous progress can be made to make this housing affordable without subsidies. We always think first of subsidies, but it should be the last. It should be the regulations, the taxation. All of these things have to be looked at to make the product affordable, the loans and the house. Subsidies may, however, be needed in most countries to reach further down. But subsidies should be focused on the household. It is the last resort to subsidize your housing finance system. Because if you have a housing finance system subsidized, you crowd out, in many cases, the private sector. Also, if you have subsidized finance, you cannot take these cash flows that you get from the mortgages, subsidized mortgages, to investors. Investors will not touch a 6% loan like we have in Nigeria as a rule, for a securitization. That cash flow is just not enough. So if you subsidize your loans, then you are constrained and keep these subsidies on your book. You cannot leverage, in other words. So if you have to subsidize your through blended funds or whatever, do it in such a way that it is phased out as soon as you can, so that it is not beginning to be a hindrance on your book. So I will stop there, and I trust that during these next 2 days, you will address a lot of those issues that I'm talking about green, affordable, and therefore sustainable housing. And I look forward to all the discussions. For old as I am, I'm still very interested in seeing the solution in my lifetime. So thank you very, very much.
Maria, thank you so much.